Welcome back, my fellow colleagues. This is 101 Symmetric Tree. Okay, this one not too bad, but it's not going to make any sense unless you watch me draw it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to draw this out. Actually, I'm going to walk you through. I'm going to read the problem. I'm going to walk you through it. We're going to write the solution, and then we're going to draw it out and work through it. The reason it has to be done this way is because this is you're going to do this recursive. It's not going to make any sense if someone just tells you how the problem works. You have to work through it so that you see how it works. So that's what we're going to do first. But so let's get started with that. Then I'll draw it afterwards, and it's going to make a lot more sense. But symmetric tree. Given a binary tree, check whether it. Let me see if I'm recording real quick. I am. Given a binary tree, check whether it is a mirror of itself, symmetric around its center. For example, this binary tree, shown as a list here, but it's really like this. Is this symmetric? Well, yeah, right? When they're saying symmetric, they're saying, hey, can you fold this and it be the exact same? And for this is true. But what they're also saying is that you might be thinking, oh, well, this is a triangle. If you fold it right in half, you're going to get a triangle, which is good, right? They're the same. But what's important to note is there are two ways that the trees can be different. You have structural differences, and then you have like value differences, right? So this tree structurally is the same, right? As compared to this tree is not structurally symmetrical, right? But the thing with this tree is that all the values are the same, right? So with this tree, you can see that this is symmetrical, but let's just say you swapped out 2 for 3. Now it's structurally the same, but as a value, it's different, right? And so that's no good. So how are we going to program this, right? So if we take a look at this, right, there's a few edge cases you want to handle first. And why do you want to handle those first? It's just better to think about them now so you can kind of structure so you know what your algorithm is working on, right? So they're asking us to define this symmetric function, but we're also going to define another function, which is going to actually be our recursive function. But even before we start that, right, let's look at some cheesy input, right? If they pass in a root node, right? Root node is just 1. Is this symmetrical? Well, yeah, it's symmetrical because there's only one node in the tree, right? So it has to be symmetrical. There's nothing for it to be unsymmetrical with, right? And so the first thing we can do to get that out of the way, we can say if. Oh, so yeah, for also going back to that real quick. Well, how do we know, right, that a node only looks like this, right? Well, a node in this tree is defined as it has a value and it has a left node and a right node. And these left nodes and right nodes have left nodes and right nodes and so on and so forth, which creates a tree, right? So how do we know when a node is by itself? Well, when its left node and right node is none, right? That's when you know that the node is by itself. So we don't really care what the value is, but if you don't have a left node, you don't have a right node, then, and we're talking about the root node here, then it's symmetrical. So we can do that. We can say if root.left is none and root.right is none, we're just going to return true. Then from here, what we're actually going to return is mirror, which is our actual function, right? That's going to do the rest of this, right? So we got past the first part, right? We said, we handled our edge cases. We said if there's a node by itself, and that's the only node that's in the tree at all, then that's symmetrical, right? Now let's define our function. We're going to call it isMirror. It's going to take self because that's how Python works. And we're going to give it a left node and a right node, right? Why are we giving it a left node and a right node, right? Because what we want is we want to do a pairwise checking of symmetrical nodes, right? Because you might be thinking, well, this is symmetrical, right? But for something to be symmetrical, 3 has to be on the outside of this third layer, and the 3 has to be on the outside of the other layer, right? And so these 4s have to be on the center of the third layer. And so we need some hooks to be more precise with how we check whether or not nodes are symmetrical, right? Because we don't want to just say nodes are symmetrical if they both exist, and if they both exist for each subnode and they're the same, right? Because that's not exactly how this works, right? And so before we even get to the brunt of handling when values exist, let's handle when values don't exist, right? So when values don't exist, so if we have a tree that's if we just take a look at this and we just say the tree is just 1 with a left node that sits 2, and there's no 2 here, right? I'm going to use my mouse to block it, right? This tree is not symmetrical, right? And it might make more sense if I just do it over here. If I just say, hey, this is the tree that I'm talking about. It's just 1 as the root. It only has a left child, no right child, right? Is this symmetrical? It's not, right? And so if you ever run into a scenario where only one of these exists, right, then it's not symmetrical, right? It physically cannot be. It doesn't really matter which one's missing. It's just not symmetrical, right? So how do we define that, right? So we'll say if left is none or right is none, return false, right? And so that's going to check, that's going to get that case, right? If either of these are missing, then we're false, right? But we also want to check another case, right? Well, what if we have the case where we mentioned, well, we have this node handling that case, but what if we have a case where, let's just say, we have something like this, and I'm just going to do this really fast. And so this is kind of what I mean, right? So here we have a tree that is symmetrical, right? But one on the 3rd level, or I guess on the 2nd level, both of these nodes are missing a node, right? Both of these nodes are missing, right? And that's good in this case, right? Because that would mean they're symmetrical, because both of these nodes are missing. This node's missing its left node, this node is missing its right node, and this node is missing its left node. So that's good, right? That means this is a symmetrical tree, right? So we need to handle those cases, right? So we'll say if left is none and right is, oops, I'm sorry, this one is if left is none and right is none, then we're gonna return true. That means just for these nodes that we're comparing, it's good that they're both missing, right? Okay, so that's good so far, right? So these two cases here exist to handle when missing nodes, right? So if we're missing nodes or we're missing only one node, we need to handle that, right? And so in here is where we'll actually get to making sure that values and, you know, the rest of the tree is intact, right? Because we have to handle when we're missing nodes and so on and so forth. So this is where the brunt of the magic is, right? So if we take a look here, right, the only thing left remaining is if we're checking if the root is by itself. Okay, that's good. That's symmetric. Okay, we're checking if only one node exists. That's bad. Return false. But before that, the order here is very important. We have to check if left is none and right is none first. So if both of these are missing, that's good. If we had this one first, right, this one would always go off, right, because you can short circuit. Only one of these has to be true, and both of these has to be true. So if we put this one first, then we'll always return false when we should return true sometimes. So your and here is going to go first, just because it's a more specific case, and its case falls into this one's case as well, so it's kind of problematic. So what's left is to handle when values do exist. When pretty much we handle, and when things don't exist, we need to handle when, you know, both left nodes and right nodes exist, and make sure the values are the same, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to return is mirror. We're going to return this function as a function of itself. So we're going to make this is like, you know, recursion. So the first thing we want to check, right, before we even check, right, whether or not, for example, this tree right here, before we even check whether or not these nodes are symmetrical, there's no point in checking it, right, if this one is 1 and this is 2 and this is 3, right, because the values aren't the same, right? So the first thing we want to do there is just say, hey, is left.val equal to right.val? If that's true, that's kind of dope. Well, let's make sure their trees are symmetrical as well. So we're going to return self.isMirror, and then this is where the brunt of the magic goes. So we're going to return 2 versions of this, and it's going to make way more sense when we walk through it as we draw it. Why are we doing 2 things, right? So we need more fine tail control when doing a pairwise symmetrical comparison, right? Because you can't just go ahead and say, hey, is the left node of 2 the same as the left node of the other 2? They're not, but this tree is still symmetrical. It's because symmetricity is defined differently, right? So we want to check if the left node of this node of 2 is the same as the right node of this node. And we want to check that the right node of the left node is the same as the left node of the right node. And so it's confusing, but basically you want to check the inner and the outers of both. You don't want it to be like a literal comparison of left, 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 left and left, right and right, left and left, right and right. It's not quite the same there. That's not how you would do that. And so to literally write what we said, right, a tree is symmetrical when the left node of the left node of the node that we're at, so left dot left, and so left dot left is equivalent to the right node's right node. So we can write that here. And to make sure that the rest is symmetrical, we want to make sure that the left node's right node is the same as the right node's left node. And so that's what we're going to do here. Just to say it again, we're going to make sure that the left node's right node is the same as the right node's left node. And so we can run this here. Oops, I forgot to say self.isMirror and pass in the root.left and root.right. Has no attribute left on 22. Okay, so our final, I just realized that I actually ended up duplicating a case here as I was explaining it because I have a lot going on, but I just realized what we're missing. So earlier I said we had to check, right, that only if a node is by itself, then it's symmetrical, right? And so we can, though our function itself will actually check that and we'll show that. What we really want to return true is if root is none, then we'll return true. And so we get there, and this is usually faster than, first time doing this problem, by the way, but it's usually pretty fast, but it depends on how many people are running code on the server. But that is what that looks like. And so I'm going to hop over into Photoshop and show you guys why this works, right? So let us do that. So the first thing we want to do, right, when we're doing this, right, we want to make sure of a few things, right? The first thing we want to make sure, right, is that we have the photo drawn, right? So the tree that we're working with, right, that we want to say is symmetrical is 1, 2. This is going to be a little bit small just to be keep it brief. And so this is the tree that we're working with, right? And so the second thing I'm going to do, right, is that I'm going to write the code on the side of the screen. It's going to be quick, but the point is we're going to do in pseudocode if left equal none, and right equal none. Actually, I'm just going to, okay, so we're back, and so we have the code on the screen. We only have isMirror on the screen. You might be wondering why. It's because isMirror is technically the only function that matters. IsSymmetric maybe does 2 lines of code. It just basically says, hey, if the root's none, return true, right? If there's no tree, then it's symmetrical, right? Let's just say that. The rest, then it just calls isMirror, right? So why does this function work? And it makes a lot more sense. I'm going to show you a way to draw it that's going to make a lot of sense too. So the first node, right, that we call, when we call isSymmetric, right, we call it with root.left and root.left and root.right, right? And then the code that's happening is right up here. And so what we're going to do, right, we're going to write the function. So we're just going to go through it line by line quickly. It's going to speed up, and then we're going to see why this works. So we're passing in, right, our first call is root.left, root.right, right? And the root.left and root.right is 2 and 2, right? And so this is how you're going to see the pairwise comparison. So the first two nodes that we're actually starting with is 2 and 2, right? And so let's go through that with 2 and 2. So what we're going to see, right, is that we're starting with 2 and 2, right? And we're just going to go through the code. So it says, if left is none and right is none, return true. Both of these are 2 and 2. So they're clearly not none. So we're not going to do that. If left is none or right is none, well, neither of these is none, right? So we're going to keep going. Then we're going to say, well, return this condition, return left.val is equal to right.val, and self.mirror.left.right.right, and self is mirror left.right and right.left, right? So we can write this like this. Each line basically being one of the conditions, and we're going to write dashes where the statement would go for that expression, basically. So the first expression, it says, hey, does left.val equal right.val? Where both of these are 2, right? So that's true. That's the first case, right? And then we're going to say, hey, well, we said and self.isMirror is left. We're going to call isMirror with left.left and right.right, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a line down, a line not too long, and we're just going to say left.left, right? So it says left.left and right.right. So let's go to 2. 2's left.left is 3. So we're going to put 3 here. And the other 2's right.right is 3, right? And so now that we have the nodes that we're working with, let's look at the function. So if left is none and right is none, well, both of these aren't none. If left is none or right is none, both of these aren't none. So we're going to do this triple expression once again. And so this is going to be boom and boom and boom, right? So we're working with 3 and 3 there, right? So now we're going to call the function again, right? Because we're in here with the 3 and statements, right? The first one to check was, since we're calling isMirror, we're going to go inside, right? And left.left for 3 is none, and right.right for 3 is also none. So we're just going to write x for nones, right? And then we're just going to go through this function, right? And also, oops, this might be a little bit confusing. So we're not going to write actually, yeah, okay, so this is okay. And so we're going to have x and x here, right? And then it's going to say, well, if left is none and right is none. Okay, yeah, so that is a little bit confusing. So we're going to remove the 3 ands, right? Because you only get the 3 ands. So we're going to call left, we're going to call isMirror with 3 and 3, right? These 2 nodes that we're working with, right? So we go into isMirror, right? And what we're working with is x and x, right? So we're working with x, and we're saying, hey, both x and x are none because both of these, right, are none. There's nothing there. There's nothing there in the tree. So we're saying, hey, if left is none and right is none, we'll return true. Both of these nodes are symmetrical in the sense that both of them are missing nodes. So we're just going to say return true. Right? That's kind of dope. Right? Remember but now that means we have 2 of the 3 expressions done, right? So we go back up, and 2, the third part of the expression was, and self is mirror left.right and right.left. Well, what parts of the tree we're at 2, right? Because we wrote 2 and 2 here. What is left dot right of the first 2? That is 4. Now, what is right dot left of the other 2? 4. Okay, we're calling is mirror with those parameters, right? So if left is none and right is none, that's not true. If left is none or right is none, return false. That's not true, right? And now we get into this statement again, right? So we're going to get and, right? And so what happens there is now we can go through and evaluate the function and evaluate the values again, right? And so what's going to happen is hey, is left dot val even equal to right dot val? And 4 is equal to 4, so we're going to say true there. And then it's going to say, hey, I just realized we kind of messed up on 3, 3, but this 4 and 4 is how it's supposed to be. But we're going to say, hey, call self dot is mirror with both of the empty components on both sides. And what you get here is that both of these are null, so this returns true. And then we do the same. We do the same with the other half of the tree, right? And so what you get is we end up checking both sides to see that both sides are null, so that both of these are symmetrical. Boom, and then this returns true. And so basically what you end up with is that this whole tree is symmetrical. And so that's kind of how this function works. It's like a pairwise or a recursive pairwise comparison with a little bit more control. And so that's basically how this function works. We got a little bit confused here with 3, but just to redo that part, to make it a little bit more clear, but we're going to redo 3 just because I messed up on it. So when we call the second part of the function, we're evaluating is left dot left and right dot right the same. And what we're working with here is 2 and 2. So we're saying left dot left is 3. So we're working with 3, comma, and right dot right, which is 3, right? And so we call is mirror with those parameters, just like we did with 4, right? And so what we see is that if left is none and right is none, well, that's not true. If left is none or right is none, well, that's not true. So we end up with this third case, right? Or say, hey, well, the values obviously exist here. Are they even the same value, right? And we say, and then we say, yeah, that's at least true. And then we're going to call is mirror with both of the null components of these nodes, right? And we say, hey, is mirror, well, if left is none and is right is none, well, both of these are none, so that is true. And then we do the same for these two on the insides, and that is true. And basically that's how this function ends up working out, that it ends up being symmetrical. Now the thing is, since it's and, what you get right with each return is this long consecutive combinations of ands. If any of these return false, then the whole thing is false, right? Because this is just a chain of and. You can imagine this is just like each level we just add like 3 or 4 chains onto the and if any of these are false, right, then the tree is not symmetrical, right? And so if any of these nodes were not the same, like in case this was 5, what you would get is that one of these would become false. And if any of these are false, then false and true is false, right? And then this would make this false. True and false and true is false. And so this is how this works. Now, what is the time and space complexity, right? So the time complexity, since we never cross over any nodes twice or anything like that, this is kind of just not a linear traversal. We only visit each node in this tree once, so it's linear time. Now, what's the space complexity, right? So the space complexity that we're working with here is, if we take a look back at the algorithm, we're not literally declaring any variables to use, right? And so you might think, well, this is constant space or something like that, right? Well, the thing is, we're not paying any literal space in like allocating memory for variables or data structures or anything like that. What you're paying for in memory here is with stack frames, right? So recursion isn't free. Every time you call a recursive function, you add, stack, or you create a stack frame. And so basically, what you're paying with this, since the time complexity is linear time, you're paying with linear space as well. So each call, you're going to add a stack frame, and so that's where you're kind of spending your memory. And so this is symmetric tree. And then we're going to do the iterative one probably soon, but yeah.